There is no climate crisis, and we're not in the midst of an energy transition either. Humans and all complex life on Earth is simply impossible without carbon dioxide. Hence the term carbon pollution is outrageous. Carbon dioxide does indeed absorb infrared radiation, contributing to warming. But calling carbon dioxide pollution is like calling out water and oxygen, the other two irreplaceable molecules for life on Earth. There is no such thing as clean energy or dirty energy. All energy sources have impacts on the world, both positive and negative. Energy enables all human activity and is simply too important to cheapen the dialogue by using these 5 deceptive, alarmist marketing terms. We can do better than that. Credible, honest dialogue is sadly lacking in today's discourse. These 5 terms, climate crisis, energy transition, carbon pollution, clean energy, and dirty energy, are not only deceptive, they are in fact destructive deceptions. Destructive because they drive centrist politicians and regulators to oppose life-critical infrastructure like building pipelines and natural gas export terminals. They cause huge anxiety in kids, squelching the optimism that is so critical to life success. And they deflect attention away from critical, solvable problems that currently lead to 10 million premature deaths each year. Language matters. Let me cover each one of these destructive deceptions briefly. Climate crisis. The globe is slowly warming, and sea levels are gradually rising, and have been for about 150 years. The second half of this time period, since the end of World War II, human burning of fossil fuels has increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by about 50%, which amplifies the warming and sea level rise that began in the late 1800s as the Little Ice Age ended. Since the end of World War II, global human life expectancy, wealth, health, and opportunity have surged like never before. Hence, any negative impacts from climate change were clearly overwhelmed by the benefits of increasing energy consumption. What about extreme weather, you ask? We have seen no increase in the frequency or intensity of hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, or floods, despite endless fear-mongering of the media, politicians, and activists. This is not my opinion. This is the facts, as contained in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. Further, deaths from extreme weather have been plummeting for a century, from nearly 500,000 annual deaths in the 1920s down to an average of just over 10,000 annual deaths today. This is a cause for celebration, not a crisis. Let's make sure this trend continues. The only thing resembling a crisis with respect to climate change is the regressive, opportunity-squelching policies justified in the name of climate change. These policies have driven up energy prices, destabilized electrical grids, and displaced high-paying, energy-intensive jobs to other countries and states without these perverse energy policies. No, these policies have not meaningfully reduced global greenhouse gas emissions. Simply moving emissions or jobs from the US or UK to China or Vietnam is not a reduction in emissions. Energy transition is another term that has been used to justify policies that deploy large government subsidies and mandates to enrich well-off and connected while impoverishing everyone else. Yes, I am one of those needlessly enriched by these destructive policies, as increasing barriers to oil and gas production have predictably driven up prices and delivered record profitability in the oil and gas industry. But haven't these trillions of dollars of subsidies over 20 or 30 years driven at least the start of a real energy transition? In short, no. World demand for oil, natural gas, and coal hit all-time records last year. The total percent of global energy supplied from fossil fuels has declined, but only from the mid-80% 30 years ago to the low 80s% today. At that rate, we have another 600 or 700 years left to finish the transition. That glacial rate of change does not qualify as a transition. Wind and solar today provide only about 3% of global primary energy, and that is only the low-hanging fruit in the electricity sector in the wealthy nations. This took trillions of dollars of subsidies and countless mandates, but those were not the only costs. We now have to suffer with more expensive electricity and less reliable service. See Europe and California as exhibits A and B. And this was the easy 3%, the low-hanging fruit. Imagine the impacts of changing the harder, the remaining 80+% of global energy supply. Truth be told, we don't have viable technologies to replace our largest uses of hydrocarbon energy, which is in both the manufacturing sectors and the transportation sector. Manufacturing requires high-temperature process heat to fabricate materials and everything else we make. That high-temperature process heat only comes from hydrocarbons. In the transportation sector, truck, ship, and air transport require extremely high energy density, today only possible from hydrocarbons. The truth is, there is no energy transition happening right now. No matter how much money, how many climate policies, activism, or hot air are thrown at the problem. Energy is hard. When political posturing collides with physics, physics wins every time. Progress will only come from honest, sober thinking and long-term time horizons. Not much of that is visible today. Carbon pollution is the most shameful marketing term that I've ever heard. I mentioned that atmospheric CO2 concentration has gone up by about 50% since pre-industrial times. If instead of rising by 50%, what would have happened if it fell by 50%? Photosynthesis would have stopped as atmospheric CO2 dropped below the threshold required, 150 parts per million for photosynthesis. This would prevent plants from growing or even surviving. All animals, including humans, would soon die of starvation. One could rightfully call that a crisis, even a climate crisis. Pollution or pollutants are substances that harm human health, like mercury, lead, or smog. We know what these are and that they're harmful, and that above certain thresholds, they're deadly. The Clean Air Act, passed in 1970, named the 6 most harmful pollutants to human health: particulate matter, carbon monoxide, very different from carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, and ground-level ozone. Fortunately, sensible regulation of these pollutants, combined with innovation, has driven down annual emissions by 86% from 1970 to today. Wealthy countries are dealing with pollution. Low and middle income countries still have lots of room for improvement. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It is a greenhouse gas. Confusing these two is frightening kids and deflecting much needed attention from the huge pollution problems that still kill millions of people every year, mostly in lower income countries, from China to India to Africa. Just indoor air pollution arising from burning wood or dung for cooking and home heating causes over 3 million needless deaths each year, according to the World Health Organization. The solution is simple: clean cooking fuels in the form of a cook stove and refillable propane canisters. Over 1 billion people have made this simple transition, but 1/3 of humanity, 2.5 billion people, still lack access to clean cooking fuel. Clean energy and dirty energy are 2 other fact-free, shameless marketing labels. One need not visit the horrific cobalt and copper mines in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the slave labor-staffed, coal-powered polysilicon fabrication facilities in Xinjiang, China, or the toxic rare earth metals processing ponds in China to become shorn of the illusion that solar and wind energy are lily-white clean. There are no such things. Wind and solar energy require roughly 10 times as much energy-intensive materials like cement, steel, polysilicon, etc., per unit of energy produced compared to oil and gas. Land usage is even worse. Wind and solar require 100 times as much land for equivalent energy production as oil and gas. It would be hard to call wind or solar clean or low environmental impact with a straight face. Energy production is large-scale, highly physical endeavor, and it always and everywhere brings sizable impact. When people call solar or wind clean, they are either naive or they are instead referring to reduced greenhouse gas emissions versus fossil fuels. Wind and solar do indeed deliver reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but certainly not zero greenhouse gas emissions as typically claimed. Wind and solar farm construction requires copious amounts of energy, and specifically energy from fossil fuels, and raw materials from fossil fuels too. Wind turbines are highly visible embodiments of hydrocarbons. The huge steel-reinforced concrete bases are made from coal and intense amounts of natural gas, as are the giant steel towers, while fabricating the fiberglass blades requires high process heat only possible from hydrocarbons, and the giant plastic resin blades themselves literally are hydrocarbons. Solar farm fabrication is even more energy intensive than wind farms. Let's just be honest. All energy production brings trade-offs. The question is, which package of trade-offs do you prefer? The high energy density, meaning lots of energy from a relatively small amount of land from oil and gas, has allowed wealthy countries to reclaim so much land for forests and wilderness that previously supplied wood for burning or that was required for farmland with less efficient agricultural practices, without hydrocarbon fertilizers and mechanized farming. Is returning so much land to nature dirty? Of course not. The energy and climate dialogue is fraught with so many challenges. Let's not compound the problem by using destructively deceptive terms like climate crisis, energy transition, carbon pollution, clean energy, and dirty energy. These terms are nonsense. Let's just be honest.